Picture this, you're a mathematics tutor teaching with this calculator, which doesn't have all of the features necessary for the modern exam. Specifically, it can't calculate values for a general normal distribution. Your students laugh at you when you wax on about how back in your day, you had to look up the values in big statistical tables. Then you remember that you're becoming like your parents who rambled on about how back in their day, they had to look up the trig values in big tables. So just another reason to feel old. And I've seen you in the comments, my hair isn't thinning, thank you very much. You grow tired of your students' mockery, but you're also an autistic mathematician who doesn't cope well with change, with an irrational sentimental attachment to the calculator that carried you through your A-levels, your degree, your PhD, and what you had hoped would be a long and happy teaching career. Happy teaching career. But the inconvenience grows, you decide that enough is enough, it's time to upgrade. Luckily, Casio understands the power of muscle memory and sentimental attachment and have opted for a model of steady, incremental adjustment and improvement, unlike other tech companies who incessantly rearrange and objectively worsen their UIs with every update. So you opt for the latest model, the FX991EX, and find it surprisingly cheap on eBay, advertised as an official Casio, boxed and brand new, so you can buy it with all of the glee and excitement that an autistic mathematician can muster. But while waiting for delivery, questions start to eat away at you. Why couldn't you find this calculator in shops, where instead they were selling this knockoff nightmare? Why were some of these calculators selling for upwards of £50? What if those commenters are right about your hair? It arrives and something feels off about it. It's light, the edges of the keys feel harsh, the printing of the symbols is poor. You take to r/calculators and realize the cold truth. There is currently a huge market for fake Casio calculators. That's right, calculators of all things. What's the first thing you do? Of course, you bury the evidence and ensure your students never find out. But actually, instead of feeling like a fool, you're fascinated. How on earth did this happen? What does this calculator have to do with it? Why didn't you trust your instincts telling you that change is always a bad thing? Join me as we tumble down the rabbit hole of the bootleg market that has sprung up around this calculator. First, a quick history of calculators. We won't start with, the abacus, but the modern calculator, which was once the only consumer product capable of advanced calculations, aside from a mathematician, but their temperament and absence of a solar cell rendered them an inconvenient choice for most users. Specifically, I want to focus on this series of Casio calculators which emerged as the de facto standard here in the UK. Tracking the design changes is essential context for understanding the explosion of fake EXs. This is Casio's VPAM line, and I love the boldness of describing your own product as visually perfect, but to be fair, this was a minor revolution in calculator operation. Older models tended to use reverse Polish notation, where the numbers are entered before the desired operation. So I might type in 216343 plus to acquire the sum of those numbers. A more complicated calculation is broken down step by step in this way. If you grew up with that kind of calculator, you were probably pretty fluent at untangling calculations and typing them in that format, but it is in conflict with usual written mathematical expression, and for me, I wouldn't want to interrupt my maths flow, shift my brain into calculator mode, and get an answer before continuing. This interruption in flow is something we'll return to shortly. Some calculators allowed for what we call infix notation, like the FX7000G, but Casio standardized this in 1994 with the mainline VPAM series, beginning with the FX991S. Now the VPAM line is split into several calculators with different levels of complexity. The letter after the number represents the current generation. I have absolutely no idea why these numbers and letters were chosen, and I don't think Casio know either. The 991S has the standard scientific calculator layout. It's a traditional 4-function calculator, and then some. We have the usual advanced functions, with options to calculate with complex numbers, logical operations, and different number bases. Almost every key pulls double duty, with the shift key bringing in even more functions, usually related to the main key like sine and inverse sine, but sometimes just squeezed in like combinations appearing on the divide button. A glaring flaw is that the whole calculation is never displayed. Make a mistake, and you'd never know. Casio would fix this in 1998 with the W series, introducing a compressed dot matrix to show the inputs, while the output is shown on a traditional 7-segment display. These cursor keys allow us to go back, check, and edit our inputs. The alpha button is introduced here, working like a second shift, so now some keys can pull triple duty. more advanced functions appear and some are rearranged and renamed. This modulus function is renamed to abs because hey, we've got to have abs somewhere, and as mathematicians, we're unlikely to have them on our bodies. This represents the true beginning of the modern scientific calculator. There's a clear separation between basic, advanced, and utility operations, with the size, shape, and color of the buttons differentiating the sections. Delete and clear are visually distinct from any button, and further advanced functions are color-coded. Maybe it's weird to rhapsodize over the aesthetics of a calculator of all things, but it's just good design. The 991 MS introduced a 4-directional cursor interface to scroll up and down through previous calculations. While 2 function buttons had to be removed to accommodate this, sensible mergings were made so as not to violate any muscle memory built up from previous versions. Keep that in mind. Now, amazing as it was, the 2-line display wasn't perfect. It awkwardly compressed many functions, leading to death by brackets in multi-step calculations. Enter the 991ES in 2004, probably the most radical shift in design and functionality of not only this line of calculators, but in calculators as a whole. Gone was the 7-segment display and 2-line setup. Now the screen was made of one big dot matrix. Some earlier calculators had used similar displays, but the ES boasted natural textbook display. Now everything can be entered exactly as written by hand, the dot matrix screen being so flexible as to accommodate basically any expression you could throw at it. Helpful for large formulae inputs or crazy stuff like this simple continued fraction, though its processing power was limited and longer expressions suffered from some pretty bad input lag. And outputs could be displayed in exact form. Fractional, in terms of roots, in terms of pi, the calculator could handle it. Incredible for most grown-up mathematicians who seldom wish to work with decimals, statisticians notwithstanding. And if you do want to see the decimal, you just tap the S to D button, which many giggling teenagers refer to as the STD button. And if there are any teenagers watching this, just a quick reminder, you're not funny, and you never were. I loved this calculator so much, and it immediately saw its benefits when I bought one at age 16. That's over half of my life ago. For half my life, it's been my calculator. At this point, it's more like my animal familiar. We had some crazy times, but as much as I love it, it doesn't do everything required today, as I mentioned at the start of the video. So, after many years of inertia, I finally caved and bought the latest model. Released 21 years after the first VPAM.
Now, perfected.
The FX991EX, despite being named about as clunkily as a Microsoft gaming console, boasted a massive resolution upgrade. It can do all that boring statistical stuff that my beloved ES couldn't, and it can also solve up to degree 4 polynomials and support 4x4 matrices. Its utilization of the increased resolution is spot on, decreasing the size of the expressions and therefore allowing more to fit on screen without sacrificing readability. Android, take note. Why, when we have 4K screens, does the screen generally contain less information than before? Once again, there is still this clear separation, with the color choice providing an even greater contrast. Buttons and their shift functions are generally paired in sensible ways. The mode-specific options are bunched in option rather than clumsily spread across the number keys. The EX, for my money, is the best VPAM calculator, refining and improving upon the ES in practically every way. It's so good that even fake versions are selling. And at this point, I want to take a minute to explore why we still have a use for calculators. Because there's something hilarious about getting excited for a resolution of 192 by 63 and calling it a massive upgrade when it came out the same year as the world's first 4K smartphone. Smartphones have massively superior processing power and memory, and while they are much more expensive, they are something that most of us already own. Why not download an app or use something like Wolfram Alpha? Well, there's one obvious answer: exams. Students clearly can't take a smartphone into an exam. A calculator is as powerful as it is limited. I'll explore this much more later, but also, I still use a calculator, and I'm not alone. There are dozens of us. Plenty of nerds reach for one of these instead of an app. Maybe it's for nostalgia reasons, but there are many benefits to having a dedicated device. Most obvious is that when you whip out a calculator, you don't have to resist the other 1,000 things vying for your attention as soon as you unlock your phone. You might be more disciplined, but getting distracted by one of these isn't a personal failing, it's what they are designed to do. Also, the limitations of the calculator forces all of the regular functions to be just a couple of button presses away rather than getting bogged down in endless menus, and the natural display is crisp and clean without the death by brackets issue mentioned earlier. The tactile nature feels good to use, means we're less prone to misclicks. And finally, there isn't some forced software patch that can come along and destroy the muscle memory you've built up for years. You can basically use this for the rest of your life. You've hopefully noticed that each new model addresses a major deficiency in the old design and masterfully fixes it in a smooth, unobtrusive way. So when you are forced to change, you can upgrade, safe in the knowledge that Casio just tweaked things a little bit to accommodate new features, and oh my god, what is that god-awful thing doing here? That's right, it's a Casio, and my god, just look at it. Gone is the immediately clear visual separation between the basic and advanced function buttons. Now they are all the same shape and colour, where once the secondary functions could fit nicely above each button, now they are awkwardly shoved off into the corners. Apparently so you can see them even while pressing the button. But I'll leave it as an exercise to work out why that's a ridiculous justification. The cursor keys are horridly placed off-center, leaving these voids, along with a confusing up-down navigation system whose usage is unclear. And why these symbols are embossed in the buttons instead of just printed is utterly beyond me. Separate buttons exist for catalog, tools, and settings. It's unclear what the difference is there, and it's unfortunate that the symbols aren't enough to tell you what the buttons do. They need to have labels. No more triple duty keys reverting to just shift for alternate functions, and for the first time, instead of a slide case, this horrid snap case that ruins the silhouette and feels like something will break every time we detach it. Okay, so maybe it's ugly, but calculators should prioritize function over form anyway. And oh boy, we'll get to functionality, but first, a few things I actually like about the design. I like this symbol for backspace. It's become pretty standard, and the textured case feels good to hold. For the first time, the display is capable of 4 shades rather than just black and white, and having a big fat format button next to the equals key is great, as well as that's a key that we use very often. Except, it came at the cost of moving another frequently used key, so that's a net loss in my book, especially when you consider what this key actually does. Instead of a snappy exact to decimal switch, format now brings up a whole menu. So that's at least 2 further button presses just to see the decimal answer. No worries, just press Shift equals for the decimal expansion. Although if your answer involves the answer key and you forgot the first time around, that's no good, as it will recalculate. I struggle to express just how much I hate this, although a 20-minute YouTube video I guess is a good start. Remember earlier when I mentioned reverse Polish notation and how it might kill your flow? Well, all of these additional button presses do just that, and it's the first of many functional changes that make this calculator an absolute chore to use. Also earlier, I said that one of the main advantages of a calculator is its dedicated functionality, rather than being so limitless in scope that everything needs to be shoved in menus. Well, how about a calculator where everything is buried in menus? Need a quick binomial coefficient? Shift divide. Nope, it's catalog, probability, combination. Even a factorial. Shift reciprocal? Nope, it's catalog, probability, factorial. God forbid you want to use hyperbolic trig functions. Even the dedicated cube and cube root functions are gone, which may sound small, but these are essentially the highest powers you see at GCSE, so as a teacher, I reach for these way more often than the nth ones. In fact, all of these are now in menus rather than just being right there. Even abs, they took away our only abs. So if you want to quickly convert between an improper fraction and a mixed number, it's back to the horrid format menu. Get your hands on the complex number with a given modulus and argument? Yeah, have fun with that. And to get there, don't forget to set your calculator to complex mode, which is an easy menu 2, whereas here it's menu 8. Oh wait, no it isn't, you can't even use shortcuts anymore. Why would you take that away, especially after burying everything in menus? Every A-level student and teacher knows it's menu A for the equation solver rather than scrolling down. Now, you have to use the cursor, and instead of using the increased resolution to display more, the screen contains less. The Android Design School strikes again. That goes for all of their menus, by the way. Instead of just pressing the number for each entry, you have to scroll down, which is what this second set of arrow keys is for, but still, how clunky is this? The most notorious change is the behavior of the times 10 exponent button. Traditionally, this automatically groups numbers entered in standard form, aka scientific notation. So, say I wanted to divide these, the calculator would just handle it rather than executing the operations in the standard BIDMAS or PEMDAS order. The new calculator changes this. Firstly, we have to press right after every input, defeating the purpose of a quick dedicated button, but secondly, like the worst kind of actually know-it-all, it always executes from left to right. So engineers and scientists commonly dealing with numbers like this might get the wrong answer if they didn't fill their calculation with brackets. We all know that this isn't technically correct, but any competent mathematician who only invokes pedantry productively knows how this should be interpreted. Now, in case you think I'm making a big deal out of all of this clunkiness, the modern A-level is very demanding. There are lots of long questions to be completed in a relatively short time constraint. You can see it on my charity stream where I completed 24 maths exams in 24 hours. I rattled off GCSE papers in about 20 minutes, less than a quarter of the allotted time, but for A-level papers, I filled most of the time. This calculator's death by 1,000 button presses that waste your time and kill your flow is enough for me not to recommend it. I'd recommend students get one of these. Or I would, but Casio discontinued it. And so it's no wonder that fakes are selling in such vast quantities. Now, to be clear, fakes have apparently been a problem for decades, particularly in Asia and the Middle East, as illegitimate manufacturers figure out how to copy and print the chips and mimic the housing. They can then flog these at a discounted price. The problem has spread to the West with the EX. A cursory glance at eBay and Amazon shows that these knockoffs are rife. So why is the problem worse in this generation? Well, the most likely answer is the economy, which sucks. The cost of living crisis might compel many people to leap at the chance of snagging a bargain without checking, or even knowingly buying a fake and assuming that it will work fine. Moreover, during the transition, it was hypothesized that teachers were directing students to buy an EX rather than the newer model. After all, we maths teachers are a fussy bunch who really don't like change. But we also want what is best for our students, and as I said, I would not recommend anyone take one of these into an exam, especially the A-level. That drives high demand for second-hand EX calculators, some of which are going for over £50, close to double the RRP. When I was in the market for an EX, I actually contacted a couple of schools to try and get one, as they often buy calculators in bulk and then sell them on to students at cost. But they'd sold out, and that's why when I looked on eBay, totally naive about the whole fake calculator situation, I wasn't that surprised to find some selling cheap. I thought maybe wholesalers were quickly selling off the old model at a discount. But no, I was duped. And that is the alternative if you don't want the new one and you don't want to spend 50 quid on a calculator. You can buy a fake. If it copies the function, then what's the harm? Well, let me make this really clear. As much as I hate the CW, you should get one of those before getting a fake. Your mileage may vary based on which bootlegger made your particular clone, but many Redditors report failure on basic calculations. Mine actually seems quite good, though calculations take much longer to execute, and the input lag and low quality buttons make it just as painful to use as the CW. The build quality just doesn't feel all that great. Major cracks show when looking up normal distribution values, the whole reason I got this thing, where it isn't as precise. Not actually a big deal here, but this lack of precision can prevent exact values from appearing and rendering the SD button useless, a huge problem on A-level papers. If you want a quick way to tell if your EX is fake, look at the top right, where the genuine Casio has a solar cell notification that responds to light. The fakes don't have this. While I've criticized this calculator at length, I do genuinely believe that Casio were well-intentioned and care about the student experience. I contacted someone at Casio and they reminded me that they always offer free replacement batteries or units in the rare event of failure. And on the well-intentioned choices, let's look at why it was designed this way. Well, Casio claim that the design is more intuitive for students, reporting that the new model requires less training to use. An admirable goal. My own anecdotal evidence is that when I lay these calculators out for students to use, nobody reaches for this one first. My fellow teachers are indifferent at best, and a Reddit survey I posted on r/GCSE showed a lukewarm reception. When I was a full-time teacher, I taught a lot of students for whom English was a second language. scrolling through menus of English words might not be as accessible as just seeing a picture of the desired function on or above a button. Now, one might argue that needing to learn the English vocabulary and reinforcing it on every use is a good thing, but then that doesn't make the calculator more intuitive to use without training, does it? As Casio's designers say, we wanted a calculator that could be used without explanation, but we also wanted to come up with a design that students who don't like math would want to use. Firstly, the idea that someone who doesn't like maths could enjoy using one of these. I find that to be distressingly naive. In my experience, having taught hundreds of kids, there are very few who will be able to figure out how to use this without training. And those who can will be smart enough to figure out one of these anyway. Students will always need a teacher to provide instruction. Always. And even as a seasoned teacher and mathematician, I didn't find it all that intuitive where some of these functions will be located in their menus. Finally, there are features which apparently support student learning, like adding the ability to simulate dice rolls. This is a distraction. If you want kids to simulate dice rolls, you get them to roll dice. It's so valuable to give them tactile objects to hold rather than just another screen. I'm sorry, but despite the noble intent, I believe that devices like this will generally not foster creativity and curiosity among students who are not already enthusiastic about maths. That's the role of incredibly hardworking and passionate teachers. Now, I bought this fake about 1.5 years ago, I wrote this whole script, and then I got sidetracked with other projects. While finally filming, Casio announced a second edition of this new model, fixing many of the issues I raised, such as allowing numbers to be used for menu navigation, the ×10 button reverting to classic behavior, and blessedly an option to revert the format button to be like the usual S to D. I'm both pleased that Casio listened to community feedback and validated that this model is an implicit admission of some of their design failings. Many functions are still buried in menus though, so before I recommend it, I'd have to tinker on one first and get a feel for how it operates, which I would love to do, but apparently this is a US only model. Thank you for that. So that's how I wound up getting a fake calculator. And you might think that I just made this whole video to nerd out about calculators and express my hatred for the new one. And you'd be right. Thanks so much for watching. Admittedly, a weird video, but honestly, I needed a bit of a break after producing my epic video on post-quantum cryptography, which ballooned in scope and ended up taking about 9 months to make. Go check it out if you haven't already. My next project will be back to something much more mathematical, so look forward to that. Thanks again to my patrons. Hope you enjoyed the recent prop giveaway and received your cryptography trading cards. If you'd like to support me, see the link below. This has been another Proof Under Another Roof. Until next time.